13 worst fatal accidents in rock and roll history, when music's brightest lights were suddenly snuffed out by fire, speed, or fate. These shocking tragedies rewrote legends in blood and silence. And what you're about to hear may haunt you forever. Number 1. Elvis Presley. The 16th of August 1977. The king of rock and roll was found sprawled on the cold tiles of his Graceland bathroom. His heart had given out, his body unresponsive, lips tinged blue. The desperate attempts by paramedics to restart his pulse failed, and within an hour he was pronounced dead at Baptist Memorial Hospital. At only 42, the most recognizable voice of American music was silenced. Toxicology reports painted a grim picture, a body ravaged by years of prescription drug abuse, stimulants and sedatives woven into his daily life until his heart simply stopped. The suddenness of his death was horrifying. One moment he was preparing for another tour. The next he lay lifeless, discovered by his fiancée in a scene so tragic it haunted her for the rest of her life. The contrast was brutal. This was the man who once commanded entire stadiums with a swivel of his hips, yet his final breath was taken alone, behind closed doors, under fluorescent light rather than stage spotlights. Outside Graceland, chaos erupted. Fans flooded the gates, some collapsing in the heat as the news spread like wildfire across Memphis and then the world. Radios interrupted broadcasts, television anchors spoke with trembling voices, and people wept openly in the streets. The funeral procession drew thousands, with mourners lined up for hours to catch a final glimpse of their idol. Even in death, Elvis commanded a following larger than life, yet the mood was heavy with disbelief. How could a man who seemed eternal fall so suddenly? The tragedy of his final day cemented his myth. The bloated frame, the slurred last performances, and the solitude of his death painted a picture of a star consumed by fame and excess. But that ending, cruel and abrupt, only magnified his legend. The bathroom where he fell became a symbol of fragility, and Graceland transformed into hallowed ground. Elvis Presley's death was not just the end of a man, but the collapse of a dream, a reminder that even kings are mortal, and that greatness cannot shield anyone from the cold grasp of fate. Number 2. Buddy Holly. The 3rd of February 1959. The small Beechcraft Bonanza lifted off into a freezing Iowa night, carrying Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and J.P. Richardson. Just minutes after takeoff, the plane plunged into a cornfield, slamming nose first into the frozen ground at nearly 170 miles per hour. The impact was so violent that debris scattered across the snow, instruments twisted beyond recognition, and the young rock pioneers were killed instantly. Buddy's body was thrown from the wreckage, his trademark glasses later found lying in the field, a haunting relic of the crash that ended his life at only 22. That night had begun with frustration. Tired of broken-down tour buses and brutal winter conditions, Buddy chartered the small plane to reach the next concert. The decision sealed his fate. The pilot, barely 21 and unqualified for the poor weather, lost control in the blizzard. In less than 5 minutes, the tour that promised to spread rock and roll across the Midwest became the day the music died. The news rippled through America with a sense of unreality. Fans who had just seen him alive on stage struggled to comprehend that the voice behind Peggy Sue and That'll Be the Day had been silenced. The crash robbed music of one of its brightest innovators, a songwriter whose work influenced legends like the Beatles and Bob Dylan. For his young wife, barely 19 and pregnant at the time, the shock was unbearable, and she miscarried days later, unable to carry the weight of the loss. The crash site in Clear Lake turned into a somber landmark. Journalists described the field littered with snow, broken instruments, and bodies frozen in grotesque stillness. To this day, images of the twisted wreck remain among the most haunting in music history. Buddy Holly's sudden end was more than a personal tragedy. It marked a turning point, a chilling reminder that fame offers no protection from the cruelty of chance. His final flight etched itself into cultural memory, forever tied to the fragility of life and the randomness of death. Number 3. Jimi Hendrix. The 18th of September, 1970. Found lifeless in a London hotel room. His face pressed into a pillow, airways blocked by vomit. He had overdosed on barbiturates, swallowing 9 Vesparax sleeping pills. a dose enough to shut down his body's reflexes. By the time an ambulance arrived, his lips had turned blue and his pulse was gone. He was only 27, another victim of the cruel 27 Club. His life cut short at the peak of genius. The night before, Hendrix had been restless, drinking wine and taking pills to calm himself. He slipped into a heavy sleep that became a trap. Instead of resting, his body surrendered. Asphyxiation set in silently, and by morning, the most electrifying guitarist in rock history was gone. The medical examiner's report was blunt: inhalation of vomit and barbiturate intoxication. It was a lonely, undignified death for a man who had once set his guitar ablaze on stage before thousands. The shock was immediate. Fans poured into the streets of London and Seattle, stunned that the pioneer behind Purple Haze, All Along the Watchtower, and the unforgettable Woodstock rendition of the national anthem would never play again. Newspapers carried stark images of his coffin being lowered into the ground, a painful reminder that the firebrand who reinvented the guitar had burned out before his third decade. His death created a cultural rupture. Hendrix had symbolized experimentation, rebellion, and limitless sound, but his final hours exposed the fragility beneath the legend. Friends spoke of his exhaustion, of a man worn down by fame, pressure, and the demands of being a generational icon. The hotel room became a site of morbid fascination, a small space where brilliance met its violent end. The tragedy lingered because of its sheer abruptness. One day he was a headline act, the next he was a headline obituary. The world lost not just a musician, but a visionary who had changed the language of rock itself. Jimi Hendrix's final breath in that dim London room echoed louder than the feedback from his guitar, a chilling crescendo to a life that should have lasted far longer. Number 4. Janis Joplin. The 4th of October 1970. Discovered lying face down on the floor of her Hollywood hotel room, her body cold, a syringe cap, and a packet of heroin nearby. She had overdosed, the drug stronger than what she usually used. The coroner's report confirmed death from heroin overdose, possibly combined with alcohol, a lethal mix that claimed her at just 27. Alone in the landmark motor hotel, her voice silenced in an instant. The woman once called the Queen of Rock and Roll ended in brutal solitude. The hours leading to her death painted a grim picture. Friends recalled her walking back from the recording studio, upbeat about the progress of her new album. That optimism lasted only briefly. A shot of heroin laced with unusually high purity entered her system and collapsed her body's defenses. By morning, the manager found her lifeless form, her vibrant presence replaced by eerie stillness. News of her death struck like a hammer. Janis, whose raw, soul-shredding performances had captivated audiences with songs like Piece of My Heart and Cry Baby, was suddenly gone. Her final recordings, later released on Pearl, carried an almost ghostly weight, as if she had left her farewell in the music itself. Fans mourned not only a singer, but an entire spirit of rebellion and vulnerability that she embodied. The cultural shock was immense. Within weeks, Jimi Hendrix had also died, and the parallels were impossible to ignore. The same age, the same lifestyle pressures, the same tragic collapse. The 27 Club gained another unwilling member, fueling debates about the destructive path of fame. Her funeral in Texas was private. Yet thousands of fans lit candles in cities across America. Her death raised questions that still haunt music lovers. How could someone with such power on stage end so powerless in a hotel room? What do you think was Janis Joplin's tragic end, an unavoidable fate of her era? Or could someone have saved her? Leave your thoughts below, because her story remains one of rock's most painful reminders that brilliance often comes at the highest price. Number 5. Jim Morrison. The 3rd of July 1971. Found motionless in the bathtub of his Paris apartment, his chest submerged, skin pale against the water. Pamela Corson, his longtime partner, discovered him unresponsive in the early hours of the morning. By the time emergency services arrived, Morrison was already gone. No autopsy was performed under French law at the time, and the official cause was listed as heart failure. He was 27, the same cursed age as Hendrix and Joplin. His name instantly etched into the infamous 27 Club. Witness accounts suggested a night of heavy drinking and possible heroin use. Some friends believed he snorted heroin, mistaking it for cocaine, before his body collapsed under the strain. Others insisted his lifestyle, marked by alcohol, drugs, and relentless performances, had already eroded his health. The unanswered questions left a cloud of mystery over his final hours. In that small Parisian apartment, the voice that once roared through stadiums died in silence. The shock traveled quickly across the Atlantic. Morrison was not only the frontman of The Doors, but a cultural lightning rod. Songs like Light My Fire and Riders on the Storm had made him the poet, shaman of rock, a figure who embodied rebellion and danger. His death seemed almost mythical, as if he had fulfilled the dark prophecies woven into his lyrics. Fans gathered outside Père Lachaise Cemetery, where he was buried, and his grave soon became one of the most visited in the world. The circumstances of his death continue to fuel speculation. Was it simply a heart attack or a hidden overdose? Was Morrison destroyed by his own demons or by the very culture that crowned him a star? His passing left a hole not only in music but in the counterculture of the 1,960 seconds, a symbol of freedom extinguished too soon. What do you think? Was Jim Morrison a victim of fate or of choices spiraling out of control? Share your thoughts below, because his story remains one of the most enigmatic tragedies in rock history. Number 6. Kurt Cobain, the 5th of April 1994. Found in a greenhouse above his Seattle home, a shotgun across his chest, a fatal wound to his head. Beside him lay a handwritten note, equal parts farewell and lament. The official ruling, suicide by self-inflicted gunshot, with high levels of heroin and traces of Valium in his system. At only 27, the frontman of Nirvana, the reluctant voice of a generation, was gone. The scene was discovered 3 days later by an electrician who had come to install security lights. Cobain's body had already begun to show the signs of death, a haunting contrast to the image of the man who once electrified arenas with "Smells Like Teen Spirit." The shotgun blast had been devastating, ensuring that his life ended instantly. Forensic reports confirmed he had injected himself with a massive dose of heroin moments before pulling the trigger, a lethal preparation that left no chance of survival. News of his death spread with devastating speed. MTV interrupted programming, and within hours, vigils sprang up in Seattle and across the world. Thousands of young fans wept openly, some collapsing under the weight of grief. The funeral service, though private, was shadowed by mass gatherings outside, where fans lit candles, sang Nirvana songs, and read passages from his suicide note aloud. Courtney Love, his widow, publicly shared parts of the note, amplifying the sorrow and the anger. The cultural impact was immediate and profound. Cobain had been hailed as the poet of disaffected youth, yet his final act underscored the depth of his torment. His death not only ended Nirvana, but also symbolized the collapse of the grunge movement's brightest light. The greenhouse where he died was torn down, but the memory of that tragic scene has never faded. Kurt Cobain's final moment remains one of the most haunting deaths in music history. The gunshot, the drugs, the note they combined into a tableau of despair that shocked the world and immortalized him as both a legend and a cautionary tale. Number 7. John Bonham, the 25th of September 1980. After a day of heavy drinking, the drummer of Led Zeppelin was found lifeless at Jimmy Page's home in Windsor. He had consumed an estimated 40 shots of vodka within 24 hours. During sleep, his body betrayed him. Bonham choked on his own vomit, unable to wake, suffocating silently in the early morning hours. When bandmates tried to rouse him, his skin was cold, his breathing absent. The coroner's report confirmed death by pulmonary aspiration while intoxicated. He was only 32. The night before, Bonham had attended rehearsals for an upcoming American tour, one that was meant to re-establish Led Zeppelin's dominance. Instead, his overindulgence sealed the group's fate. He was put to bed on his side, as friends believed it would keep him safe. But the sheer volume of alcohol overwhelmed his system. When he rolled onto his back during sleep, the inevitable occurred. His death sent shockwaves through the music world. John Bonham was not just a drummer. He was the backbone of Led Zeppelin, the thunderous force behind Kashmir, Whole Lotta Love, and Stairway to Heaven. The band had been preparing for a massive comeback, yet with his passing, all momentum came to a standstill. Within months, the surviving members announced Led Zeppelin could not continue without him, effectively ending one of the greatest rock bands in history. The tragedy was compounded by the brutality of its simplicity. A man worshipped for his power on stage, silenced by something as mundane as alcohol in excess. Fans struggled to accept that the mighty Bonham, whose drumming had defined an era, had died so helplessly. His funeral drew thousands, including grieving fellow musicians, who recognized they had lost not only a friend, but a titan of rock. The house in Windsor became a symbol of unfinished potential. The instruments set for tour remained unused, gathering dust as the band dissolved under the weight of grief. Bonham's death was not just a personal tragedy, it marked the collapse of Led Zeppelin itself. A moment when the heartbeat of rock stopped with the silence of one man's final breath. Number 8. Randy Rhoads. The 19th of March, 1982. The rising guitar virtuoso was killed instantly when a small Beechcraft Bonanza aircraft he boarded for a joyride clipped a tour bus and crashed into a mansion in Leesburg, Florida. The plane erupted in flames on impact, disintegrating in a violent explosion that left debris scattered across the property. Rhoads, only 25 years old, was burned beyond recognition, his body pulled from the wreckage alongside two others. The doomed flight had not been planned as part of the tour. Rhoads, terrified of flying, reluctantly joined the brief ride to take photographs from the air. The pilot, who had a history of recklessness and cocaine in his system, attempted low passes over the tour bus where Ozzy Osbourne and the crew were sleeping. On the third pass, the plane's wing struck the bus, sending the craft spiraling out of control before slamming into the garage of the mansion and bursting into fire. The sheer violence of the crash left witnesses traumatized. Band members ran outside in horror as the bus shook from the impact. Ozzy himself later admitted he had been jolted awake by the sound and the sight of fire engulfing the nearby home. The three occupants of the plane died instantly, their remains barely identifiable amid the charred wreckage. The investigation concluded pilot error and drug use were to blame. Rhoads' death was a devastating blow to the rock world. Known for his groundbreaking work with Quiet Riot and later Ozzy Osbourne, he had been redefining heavy metal guitar with neoclassical precision and unmatched speed. In just a few short years, he had inspired a generation of musicians, and his potential seemed limitless. His sudden death froze that promise, leaving fans and peers to imagine what might have been. The Leesburg mansion crash stands as one of the most gruesome accidents in rock history. The flames, the wreckage, the silence that followed it was a brutal end to a career that had only begun to soar. Randy Rhoads left behind a legacy of brilliance, his life and music forever marked by the fiery tragedy that ended it. Number 9. Ronnie Van Zant. The 20th of October 1977. The Convair CV-240 carrying Leonard Skynyrd ran out of fuel and plummeted into a swampy forest near Gillsburg, Mississippi. The fuselage tore through the trees, ripping apart in a spray of twisted metal and splintered wood. Van Zant, only 29, was killed instantly from massive head trauma, his body crushed by the force of the crash. Beside him, bandmates Steve and Cassie Gaines also lost their lives, while other members suffered broken bones and gruesome injuries. The flight had begun as a routine trip between shows, but mechanical issues and poor decisions sealed their fate. Despite concerns about the aging plane, the band boarded for yet another leg of their tour. Mid-flight, both engines sputtered and died, leaving the pilot powerless. As the aircraft descended uncontrollably, passengers braced themselves in terror. Survivors recalled the deafening sounds of tearing metal and screams colliding as the plane disintegrated around them. The wreckage was discovered in a remote, wooded area. Rescue crews pulled bodies from the mangled cabin, the swamp soaked with jet fuel and blood. Van Zant's body, eerily peaceful compared to the violence of the crash, was carried out wrapped in a sheet. The scene became a defining image of rock and roll's most harrowing accident. The death of Ronnie Van Zant struck at the heart of Southern rock. He had been the voice behind Free Bird and Sweet Home Alabama, songs that became anthems of a generation. Just as the band was reaching the height of fame, the crash erased its leader and reshaped its destiny. Leonard Skynyrd's name would forever be linked not only to its music, but to the tragedy in the Mississippi woods. The Gillsburg crash left survivors scarred both physically and emotionally. For fans, the news was shattering. Radios replayed Free Bird in endless tribute, the song transforming into a haunting elegy for its own singer. Ronnie Van Zant's death became more than a loss. It became a symbol of how fragile triumph can be when fate intervenes with merciless force. Number 10. Cliff Burton. The 27th of September 1986. The Metallica bassist was thrown through a window when the band's tour bus skidded on an icy road in rural Sweden and flipped onto its side. As the massive vehicle toppled, Burton was hurled into the darkness, his body crushed beneath the wreckage. At just 24 years old, his life ended instantly, pinned under the weight of steel and shattered glass. The night before, Burton had won a bunk of his choice in a card game, a twist of fate that placed him in the position most vulnerable during the accident. Around dawn, the driver claimed he swerved to avoid hitting a patch of black ice, but survivors later questioned that explanation. Band members described the horrific sound of twisting metal and the chaos of being thrown around the bus as it rolled violently. When the wreck finally stopped, Burton was nowhere inside. Outside, his body lay beneath the overturned bus, lifeless. While his bandmates screamed in shock and desperation, rescue crews arrived to a gruesome scene. Attempts to lift the bus with a crane initially failed, and when the vehicle slipped, it struck Burton's body again. Witnesses were left horrified, many scarred for life, by the sight of the young musician crushed beyond help. The official report listed the cause as blunt force trauma, the kind no one could have survived. Burton's death tore through the world of heavy metal. Known for his innovative playing on For Whom the Bell Tolls and Orion, he had redefined what a bassist could be in metal. His presence gave Metallica its unique depth, and his absence left an unfillable void. The band was forced to carry on without him, but fans felt the sting of knowing their brightest talent had been lost to a roadside tragedy. The Swedish bus crash became a grim milestone in rock history. A rising star, extinguished not by indulgence or excess, but by the randomness of a frozen road. Cliff Burton's final night, won by a hand of cards, ended beneath the crushing silence of twisted steel and cold Scandinavian air. Number 11. Ritchie Valens. The 3rd of February 1959. The single-engine Beechcraft Bonanza plunged into a frozen Iowa cornfield minutes after takeoff, killing everyone aboard. Valens, only 17 years old, was thrown from the wreck, his body broken and lifeless in the snow. The force of the crash scattered instruments, clothing, and personal belongings across the icy ground, a chilling stillness replacing the energy of the young star who had just begun to rise. That night was meant to be an escape from hardship. Exhausted by freezing buses and endless miles of road, Valens secured his seat on the doomed flight through a coin toss with fellow musician Tommy Alsop. That fateful flip spared Alsop's life and sealed Valens' death. The pilot, inexperienced in storm conditions, lost control almost immediately after takeoff. The plane hit the earth nose first at terrifying speed, killing Valens, Buddy Holly, and J.P. Richardson instantly. The aftermath left the music world stunned. Valens had been celebrated for La Bamba and Donna, songs that brought Mexican-American culture into the heart of mainstream rock. His sudden death at such a tender age felt not just tragic, but cruelly unfair. Fans could only imagine the decades of music he never had the chance to create. His family, devastated, received the news as reporters swarmed their California home, transforming private grief into public spectacle. The scene of the wreck became immortalized in photographs, showing twisted metal against snow and the bodies carried away under sheets. For many, the image of Valens' glasses and guitar scattered in the debris became unbearable symbols of potential destroyed. The phrase, "the day the music died," later popularized by Don McLean's American Pie, was born from this catastrophe. The coin toss that decided his fate continues to haunt rock history. Was it pure chance or something darker? What do you think? Was Ritchie Valens doomed by luck, or did fate have its hand on that coin? Share your thoughts below, because his story remains one of the most heartbreaking in all of rock and roll. Number 12. Stevie Ray Vaughan. The 27th of August, 1990. A helicopter carrying the blues guitarist lifted into the foggy Wisconsin night after a concert, then slammed into a hillside within seconds of takeoff. The rotor blades tore into the earth, the fuselage crumpled like paper, and all 5 on board were killed instantly. Vaughan, just 35, was found strapped to his seat, his body shattered by the violent impact. The crash came after an electrifying performance alongside Eric Clapton, Buddy Guy, and Robert Cray. Vaughn had been radiant on stage, his guitar howling with the fire that had made him one of the greatest players of his era. Moments later, he boarded the helicopter, unaware that heavy fog blanketed the hills around East Troy. The pilot, flying without proper instruments for such conditions, became disoriented. Less than a minute into the flight, the aircraft struck the slope at full speed. The aftermath was horrifying. Rescue crews discovered wreckage scattered across the hillside, twisted steel and broken instruments buried in the mist. Vaughn's body was removed at dawn, the brilliance that had electrified crowds the night before extinguished in silence. Forensic reports confirmed the force of impact left no chance of survival. His death sent shockwaves across the music world. Stevie Ray Vaughan had been a beacon of resurgence for blues, reviving the genre with albums like Texas Flood and Couldn't Stand the Weather. He had overcome years of addiction, rebuilt his health, and was entering a new creative high. To lose him at that moment felt especially cruel. Fans across America lit candles, while fellow musicians wept openly at the loss of a man who seemed destined for even greater heights. The tragedy of the Wisconsin hillside remains one of the darkest nights in rock and blues history. A rising helicopter, a wall of fog, and a single terrible mistake ended a life that still had decades of music to give. What do you think was Stevie Ray Vaughan's death, the cruel hand of fate, or a preventable accident? Share your thoughts below, because his final flight still echoes with heartbreak. Number 13. Duane Allman. October 29, 1971. Riding his Harley-Davidson through the streets of Macon, Georgia, the guitarist collided with a flatbed truck that suddenly stopped mid-turn. His bike skidded, struck the side of the vehicle, and launched him into the air. The motorcycle toppled, pinning him beneath its weight, crushing his chest and internal organs. Paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but the damage was irreversible. Within hours, at only 24 years old, Duane Allman was pronounced dead. The accident was brutal in its randomness. Witnesses described the sickening sound of metal grinding against metal, followed by silence broken only by screams. Allman's helmet offered little protection as the impact tore through his body. The coroner's report confirmed massive trauma, injuries so severe no operation could have saved him. A man who had spent his life bending guitar strings with effortless grace was silenced by a single, cruel twist of fate on the asphalt. The loss hit the music world like a thunderclap. Allman had been the driving force behind the Allman Brothers Band, pushing Southern rock into new territory with his searing slide guitar. His work on songs like Whipping Post and In Memory of Elizabeth Reed had already made him a legend among peers. Just months earlier, the band's live album From the Fillmore East had cemented their reputation as one of America's greatest rock groups. To see such momentum destroyed in an instant left fans reeling. The funeral in Macon drew thousands, with fellow musicians, family, and grieving fans gathering to honor the young guitarist whose talent seemed limitless. His bandmates were devastated, carrying on but forever marked by the hole he left behind. The intersection where he fell became an informal shrine, with fans leaving flowers, guitar picks, and handwritten notes. Duane Allman's death remains one of rock's most tragic accidents, a reminder that even the brightest flames can be extinguished in the blink of an eye. His final ride through Macon ended not with applause, but with the crushing silence of loss. His music, however, continued to echo, immortalizing a genius stopped too soon. These 13 tragedies show how fragile even the brightest stars can be. Planes fell from the sky, buses overturned, motorcycles crashed, and legends were silenced in an instant. Their voices and guitars once shook the world, but their endings came with brutal finality. Fans still light candles, play their records, and keep their memories alive, proof that music outlives the body. Each accident left not just grief, but an echo that refuses to fade. Do you remember another moment when fate struck a musician down? Share your memory, because their stories will never be forgotten.